The words hit the room like a sudden crack of thunder. She stood in front of me, her hands trembling slightly over her stomach, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and something deeper, hope. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then she said it quietly, almost like a confession she had carried for too long. The baby in her belly was mine. I would become a father. My heart slammed against my ribs, and the only question that escaped my lips felt fragile and desperate at the same time. Would we get married? Before we continue, if you believe every story hides a lesson somewhere inside it, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves emotional stories, subscribe to Humanity Stories, and leave a comment about where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts. It was late autumn when everything started, one of those evenings when the sky looked washed in pale gray and the wind carried the smell of rain that never quite fell. I still remember the cafe where we met. It was small, quiet, and dimly lit, the kind of place where conversations felt softer and time seemed to move slower. I had gone there after work, tired and distracted, hoping for nothing more than a cup of coffee and a few minutes of silence. She was sitting alone near the window, her fingers wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Something about the way she stared outside made it impossible not to notice her. She looked like someone who was holding 1,000 thoughts but had nowhere to put them. When our eyes met, there was a brief, awkward smile, the kind strangers exchange without meaning anything by it. But somehow that small moment turned into a conversation. At first it was ordinary, weather, work, small details about life that people share when they don't expect to see each other again. Yet beneath those simple words there was a quiet pull, like two people slowly realizing they recognized something in each other. Weeks passed and the cafe became our place. We would meet after long days, talk about childhood memories, fears, and the strange paths life had taken us down. She had a gentle laugh that seemed to soften the air around her. I noticed how she listened more than she spoke, how her eyes carried a sadness that she rarely explained. And without realizing it, she slowly became part of my everyday life. There were evenings when the city lights blurred through the rain on the cafe window, and we sat there for hours saying nothing at all. Silence between us never felt uncomfortable. It felt safe. But life has a way of changing directions when you least expect it. One night, after months of knowing each other, the rain was pouring so hard that the streets outside looked like rivers of reflected neon light. We had stayed long after the cafe closed, walking slowly through the quiet city. The cold air made our breath visible, and somewhere between laughter and nervous glances, we crossed a line neither of us had planned. It wasn't reckless or wild. It felt like something fragile and real, like two lonely people finding warmth in the same place. For a while after that night, everything felt lighter. We spent more time together. We talked about traveling, about dreams we had never told anyone else. I remember thinking that life had finally started to make sense. But slowly, something in her began to change. Her smiles became shorter. Her messages came later. Sometimes she would stare into the distance like she was listening to something only she could hear. I asked if she was okay, and she would always nod, brushing it away with that same quiet smile. Then one evening she asked if we could meet somewhere different. It was a small park on the edge of the city. The sky was turning dark, and the streetlights had just begun to glow. The wind carried fallen leaves across the empty paths. She stood there waiting for me, her coat pulled tightly around her body, her face pale in the fading light. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. The baby in her belly was mine. The world seemed to tilt for a moment. My thoughts scattered in every direction. I felt shock, fear, and something strangely beautiful all at once. The idea that a tiny life had begun somewhere between our laughter and late-night walks was overwhelming. But fear rushed in just as quickly. I asked the only question my heart could form. Would we get married? The silence that followed felt longer than any answer. Her eyes filled with tears, not dramatic or loud, but quiet ones that slipped down her cheeks as if they had been waiting there for days. She looked away toward the dark trees and took a slow breath. And then she told me something that changed everything. Months before we met, her life had already been falling apart. She had left a long relationship that had drained every bit of trust she had left. She wasn't ready for love again, she said. She hadn't even believed in it anymore. But somehow, through simple conversations and warm cups of coffee, she had started to feel alive again. Yet she was still scared of promises. Marriage, to her, wasn't a dream anymore. It was something heavy, something that once broke her completely. She said she didn't know if she could walk into that again. The wind moved softly through the park as she spoke, and I remember feeling a strange calm settle inside me. Not the calm of certainty, but the calm of understanding that life rarely follows the path we imagine. We stood there for a long time, two people staring at the future without knowing what shape it would take. Weeks passed after that night. The news slowly became real. Doctor visits, quiet conversations, moments where we both tried to imagine what a child would look like, how our lives would change. Sometimes we laughed about it, sometimes we sat in silence because the responsibility felt too big for words. But something unexpected began to grow between us. Not the intense excitement of romance, but a deeper kind of connection. The kind that forms when two people face uncertainty together. There were mornings when I would see her standing by the window with her hand resting on her stomach, sunlight touching her face. In those moments, the fear disappeared and all I could see was the quiet miracle of a life waiting to begin. Still, the question I had asked in the park never fully left my mind. Would we get married? One evening, months later, we walked again through that same park. Winter was beginning, and the air carried a sharp coldness that made everything feel clearer. She stopped walking and looked at me with the same serious expression she had that first night. She said something I will never forget. She didn't